Hey everyone, before this video begins properly, I just want to give a heads up that I had to change some of the footage in the background. The first episode is obviously going to be a lot of gameplay, as you'll see, and then the rest of the show I kind of use footage from the show itself, but YouTube has a copyright detector and not a fair use detector, so despite the fact that I'm splicing all the relevant footage where it's needed, as well as generally not using audio except in parts where I'm demonstrating something, YouTube still throws a fit at the fact that I'm using the show at all, so I ended up desaturating the footage as well as adding a little bit of a film grain over it. Hopefully that resolves the issue, but otherwise, yeah, it's gonna look weird. Except for some of the essential scenes where I'm demonstrating something where I just made like a shitpost edit. So if that's why it looks weird, well, that's why. But regardless, hope you end up enjoying. And yeah, let's get right into it. Hi there, I'm Gav, or Gavster, whatever you want to call me, because I cannot for the life of me come up with an internet pseudonym that isn't just my name because I have no imagination. Anyways, one day I want to do proper video essays and long-form reviews on this channel, and I figured I'd start with this. By the way, if it wasn't obvious, this is a spoiler minefield. Nothing will be held back in this video regarding both the games and the show of The Last of Us Part 2, or Season 2. I am an enjoyer of The Last of Us series. I've been playing it since I was 14, ever since I got a PS4, and eagerly awaited Part 2, which didn't come out until 7 whole years later after the first game. The way I got it was I got a PS4 for Christmas, and despite the fact that it came with the Uncharted series as well as Fallout 4, I could not help myself, so I went out of my way and spent a cool hard $60 extra just to get The Last of Us Remastered. And I ended up thoroughly enjoying it, as well as the second part, despite the controversy on the internet. I find myself attracted to games, movies, books, TV shows, but basically anything that really lets the player simmer down and analyze and dig into what happened and why. Reward repeat playthroughs or watch-throughs by sprinkling in numerous details the viewer would miss their first time through, but realize their significance and meaning later. The Last of Us Part 2 game does this a surprising amount, to the point where I've played through it about 5 or 6 times total, and each time I notice a new, small but cool detail that makes me appreciate the game a little more. I made a review on a whole other channel many years ago about the game, and the too long didn't watch summary of that is that the game is pretty good, and I wish the developers weren't made to work an unhinged amount of hours per week to get it out. And if you want my opinion on Season 1 of the show, I also think the show was pretty good, though overall I think they extended the amount of time that you get to spend with the characters in the game, and that makes the narrative of that format hit much harder. Personally, I managed to actually get through the entire Part 2 game unspoiled. If you don't know or remember, Naughty Dog suffered leaks leading up to the game's launch where entire cutscenes including Joel's death, the protagonist swap to Abby, and the ending of the game were posted online. And by some miracle, I actually managed to bury my head in the social media sand and complete the game without those major plot beats being spoiled for me. All I heard was that they were controversial and that specific corners of the internet didn't like them. However, I chose the wise man's decision before casting judgment. Play the game for myself and see. But now we come to the show. Ever since the show was announced, I knew what to expect from it, as well as the general reaction of this story being told to a new audience, but I was very much anticipating right from the get-go the audience's reaction to Season 2. Killing off one of the main characters and the only one remaining going on to hunt down the person who did it. For the games, this was a very bold choice, and one I appreciate to make the story stand out. And though the show does the same thing, it handles it in quite a different way already compared to what emotion the game was trying to provoke. I will be going episode by episode in order to summarize my thoughts, the differences between the show and the game, which I prefer. So far, most of my preferences lie with the game. Also, keep in mind that I'm mostly writing this episode by episode as they release every Sunday, though I'm starting this script after episode 3 has gone live. So if you're in the middle of me ranting about something in episode 5 that ends up being moot by episode 8, that's why, and I'll probably address it later on. So yeah, let's not waste any more time and get right into episode 1. The interesting thing about this episode is that despite the fact that it covers a few things that occur during the start of the game, it doesn't actually even reach where the game itself begins properly. So technically this entire episode is a prequel to Part 2's events. It's weird but kind of neat in some ways. We open immediately with something that surprised me a little bit, and it's the fact that we meet Abby straight away. Conceptually, I don't have too many problems with it, but in the next episode I will get into the problems that start to sprout up from this introduction. What we know here immediately is that Abby and her friends are survivors of the St. Mary's Hospital incident, where Joel became Joel Wick and killed multiple soldiers single-handedly, as well as a surgeon who isn't totally plot relevant at all. They refrain from telling us exactly who Abby lost, but it's obvious it was someone dear to her. She reveals that she knows what Joel looks like, her intent to hunt him down, and does so with the reluctant support of her friends, who seem more interested in just moving on with their lives. The obvious difference is that in the game, our introduction to Abby is much more abrupt. They already are near Jackson, and the player, assuming they are going in blind and unspoiled, has no clue who Abby is or why she's here. While most of my thoughts will become relevant come episode 2, I will just say for now that I overall prefer how the game handles it. There's an air of mystery surrounding Abby in the game that, for the show audience, isn't present when they immediately declare that Abby was a Firefly and wanted Joel dead for what he did, when this information isn't revealed until over halfway into the game. We then cut to the opening, which I'm a little sad we didn't get a new variant on, but you know, it's just an opening sequence that most people will skip, it's nothing. And then we open with Ellie fighting someone. While she puts him in an armbar that made my former BJJ fighter self happy, it's revealed that it's a sparring session. This scene exists for 2 reasons. 1, to introduce Jessie as Ellie's friend, and 2, to show that she has a little bit of resentment for Joel's overprotective nature.
Well, I can obviously take a punch, so who cares? Fucking hard, by the way.
I pulled it.
You pulled it?
Yeah, he pulled it.
Why?
Because I told him to.
Why?
Otherwise, he would have knocked you out. And I don't want to have to explain that to Joel.
Don't do that again.
Okay.
After that, we see more of a zoomed out view of Jackson. The game gives us a little bit of the day-to-day life of Jackson, but I think I prefer how the show portrays them as a community. We get insight on their government, how they handle patrols, the holidays they celebrate, as well as the fact that, yeah, opinions on gay rights in 2003 weren't all that great.
In a church.
Nice friend who I appreciate.
What did you just say?
We also get to see what Joel's day-to-day life looks like, and I enjoy the callback to the fact that he seemed to be a construction contractor both in the game and the show. He's helping with electricity, and we also see that he has a more personal relationship with Dina in the show. Not quite on the level that he has with Ellie, but it's up there. This is another point in the show's favor. I find the best scenes of the show are the ones that are totally original from the game, for the most part. The best episode of the first season is by far episode 3, and I feel like it's not a coincidence that episode 3 was basically all original content that the game did not contain. And as a side note, was the one episode of literally anything in well over a decade that actually got me to choke up a bit. Dina mentions that she can tell something is off with Ellie and Joel, but Ellie doesn't want to talk about it, and Joel just scapegoats it with Ellie being a teenager who just wants to spread her wings. The fact that they talk about it like this in the show is generally fine, but We'll see later that this is an aspect of the show that slowly begins to snowball into a bit of a problem. The fact that characters simply say what they are feeling too much. More examples of that come later, I can promise you that much. I can at least say that I like the therapy bit of Joel and Dina's exchange. I feel like Joel going to therapy has the potential to end up making things a bit too on the nose later, but this cute scene does help set it up and kind of massage it, as well as just being funny. After that, we get a scene where Ellie and Tommy are hanging out and casually sniping infected, and it shows off one thing that I'm surprisingly neutral about, which is the fact that show Ellie is significantly less mature than game Ellie.
I got bit on my arm.
Ellie, we don't talk about that.
I got bit, everybody!
Hey.
I got bit!
Hey! Hey!
I'm immune!
Whoa! Hey!
While I do prefer the game's portrayal of that character, I'm generally more open to a version of Ellie that isn't as hardened and brooding right off the bat, especially since she's not likely to be so jovial after the next episode. Overall, sort of a neutral point unless the show does something either really good or really bad with it later on. We then get more insight into Jackson, and it's the fact that they're having a bit of a Frostpunk-styled refugee crisis. Maria wants to take everyone in, but Joel argues that they simply don't have the space until he gets the time he needs to build more housing, which is another point for the show. Both of them make convincing arguments, but it also reveals a new show-exclusive character, Tommy and Maria's son. I don't expect to see him a whole lot in the show, but given how things have played out as of now with only 3 episodes out while writing this, I feel like this character existing in the background will help explain some differences between show Tommy and game Tommy that we end up seeing later on. That and the joke Joel tells during the scene is actually really funny.
We need to build faster.
Faster? Sure, how much faster? See, we got this dial called the constructometer.
Joel.
The more you turn it, the faster we go.
What y'all up to?
Well, your wife wants me to build faster.
Didn't you tell her about the big dial?
However, I'm expecting that the refugee influx thing is, one, not really dealt with by the fact that there is a bit of a population slash coming in the next episode, and 2, we are now leaving Jackson, so I'm not sure how much this will matter in the future, but it's more, I guess, to show that Joel was once one of these people, and he's trying his best to care for them in the same way, but resources are starting to thin out, and he can't keep up with demand. Then we get to the first thing that I personally don't like a whole lot from the show, and it is the therapy scene. I will start out with what I do like about it, and it's that I like that it seems that Jackson hasn't established a solid currency yet, since it's just a smaller city, so they still barter with trading items instead of money. So in this scene, Joel pays for his therapy session with weed. 2 is that Gail, the therapist, I haven't actually watched many shows with her actress in it, but I hear she's great in those too, and she is also pretty good in here with what she is given. And she's just naturally kind of funny and charismatic, which is pretty cool considering how, like, by episode 3 she becomes unlikable in a pretty solid way, but also understandable given just who he is. And also, Pedro Pascal is acting his ass off. I don't need to explain this to you. If you know the man, you know that he's able to do some incredible line delivery and micro expressions on his face. And throughout the scene, they just zoom in on him so that you can see in real time his expression shifting from fear to sadness to this resolved determination, and it is great. He had 2 episodes in this season, and by God, he made them count. However, that being said, what don't I like about this scene? The closest scene this mirrors in the game is when Joel tells Tommy about what he did at the hospital at the very start, ending with an important line that gets flipped around later in the game.
What do you do? I saved her.
He says the same thing in the show, but the difference here is much less subtle. First, the therapist is the wife of Eugene, who in this timeline was killed by Joel after presumably being bit. And she goes on this long, drunken rant at Joel about how she should forgive him but just can't, but saying it helped take off the pressure. At least, show viewers might not be picking up immediately on why the scene is here, but I immediately clocked that this was supposed to be the world's most obvious parallel to both Ellie wanting to forgive Joel and Ellie eventually finding the strength to just forgive and forget Abby. And I feel like it was just a bit too on the nose. This is going to start a pattern where I'm going to be talking about how the game is significantly more subtle than the show. I mentioned this earlier, but when given the chance to expand and add context to scenes from the game, I feel like they add in just a little too much, overindulging in adding so much more dialogue when I feel like the brevity of the conversations in the game made them feel more subtle so that people could dig into them deeper, as well as just feel more human and natural. Then we get to an abridged version of the patrol scene from the game. Instead of it just being Dina and Ellie, the two are part of a larger squad, which makes sense. Once they arrive at the grocery store from the game, they see a bear that had been taken down by a swarm, and it's likely that the rest of the surviving zombies took shelter inside. Against their captain's wishes, Ellie and Dina insist on going inside to clear it out. Some are frustrated by this, but again, I think it's fine. It's not unbelievable that young adults like them crave excitement in their life and use that as an outlet, and it gives them a little bonding time. Also, they live in Wyoming. 25% of the population of Wyoming disappears in this show, and it's still about as populated as it is in real life. Sorry, fuck, there's not a whole lot that the two can do out there for fun. Also, picture of the dog on the Employee of the Month board. Not much to say, just a cute Easter egg from the game. Something else diverges from the games here, and it's that the show introduces stalkers here. In the games, stalkers are an infected type that prefer to hide, ambush, and flank the player rather than mindlessly charge at them. They're the halfway point between a runner and a clicker and are little more rare to encounter in both games. In the show, it's implied that this is a bit of a mutation that is either much more rare or has only started to develop recently. As of episode 3, they don't come up again, but I imagine they'll be used later. And it makes for a fun ambush scene where Ellie tries the usual tactics for getting an infected to run at her so she has a clear shot, and instead it just retreats and hides to pounce on her later.
Careful, a hunter's around.
This also gives us a peek at the Council of Jackson as Ellie and Dina report the stalker encounter to them. And again, point for the show. I really do enjoy seeing scenes that elaborate on how a society like this functions behind the scenes and how they make decisions. As I've grown older, I think my interest in politics has grown, and I enjoy seeing them in fictional settings and how they function. So long as they aren't just the absolute most boring and mind-numbing representations of them, and hey, what's that on the screen? And then we get to the party scene. The difference between the game and the show is that the game only showed a little bit of the party during a trailer, and then only mentions it. The players don't see the party scene itself until the very end for a pretty strong thematic reason. But for the show, I get that they probably aren't going to do a whole lot of non-linear storytelling like the game does, especially since it sounds like they're splitting part 2 into 2 different seasons. But other than that, the scene is pretty one-to-one with the game. Jesse and Ellie chat, Dina and Ellie dance, they kiss, homophobia, Ellie yells at Joel, they leave. Again, just from personal preference, I like the game more. I feel like the cinematography, lighting, and acting of the game's scene just resonated more with me. Might also be a case where since I just played the game first, naturally I'll be more likely to enjoy the one-to-one scenes of it more. It's like when the first time you hear a song you enjoy is the live version, and it takes a while to actually get used to the studio version. I don't know if that's actually a thing that happens to other people, maybe I'm just a fucking freak. One thing that worries me though is the porch scene, at least so far in the show. We don't know if it still happens or not. They tease it with Ellie walking up to Joel on the porch, but then she walks away. There's the possibility that she comes back, and they're just withholding the full scene until later, but as of right now, we have not seen it, and she doesn't acknowledge it to Gale later on that it was her final meeting with Joel. I really hope that she did go back and talk to him on that porch, because it is one of my favorite scenes out of both the games, and it cannot be understated how important the conversation they have there is for everything that ends up happening later. And that's basically episode 1. Other than that, we get the tease that there are fungal roots growing out of the pipes that the construction crew have been working on that could signal the infected to attack Jackson, and the tease that Abby is just arriving in the mountains overlooking Jackson. So, big storms a-comin'. This is the one. The episode I've been waiting for ever since the series began airing. And there are some strong positives and some strong negatives. It begins with a dream sequence with Abby, where her current self is trying to talk her past self out of going into the surgery room where obviously someone dear to her is dead. And again, I think I vastly prefer the game's interpretation of these dream scenes than the show. The idea is neat, but the dialogue is a little clunky. Whereas in the game, we don't actually see Abby's dream sequence quite yet. It's just implied that she's having bad dreams by Owen. We see her dreams later though. It's Abby herself reliving the same day where she ran into the surgery room and finds her dad's corpse on the ground. Bloody and likely more graphic than it really was, simply because all she remembers is just how brutal and devastating the moment was for her, not how it actually went down. There's no dialogue in the scene for the games, it's all pure visual storytelling, and the dreams even evolve after she meets Yar and Lev to show her progression as a character. In the show, Abby just straight up says,
"Don't go in there.
Stop it!
I'm telling you, go back."
No!
His brains are on the floor.
You're lying.
before she sheds a single tear and wakes up, and again that is another point to the game. Abby gets out of bed with everyone in the lodge overlooking Jackson, and again here comes a totally original scene I generally like. In the game, the group doesn't even see Jackson City. Owen does, shows Abby the view, tells her that the group will want to go back after seeing it, which spurs Abby to head out on her own. The show has them outright see it, and everyone is understandably afraid. Owen promises that he's working out a plan on how to deal with it, before revealing to everyone once Abby is gone that the plan is actually to just convince Abby to drop it and go back home, and that is another point for the show. Just seeing the Seattle crew's dynamic and each other's willingness to avenge the Fireflies and Abby's father is interesting. You can tell that all of them are on a different wavelength of whether to just leave it behind, kill Joel, or torture Joel. This time, when we cut to Ellie, we finally start where the game actually begins, with Jesse waking her up and asking about the previous night. Ellie gets flustered. Jesse reveals that he's just messing with her. The conversation they have is quite different from the game. Instead of focusing on the previous night, Jesse helps set up the idea that the infected are using each other as insulation in the deep snow and may pop out of the ground if disturbed, which is something that becomes relevant not long from now. They do loop back to the previous night and... again, holy hell, the subtlety difference is frankly jarring. In the game, they simply walk and talk. It's clear that Ellie is in an awkward and confusing stage in her life, but she never just says it outright. Just that it was a weird night and she thinks everything will be alright. It's obvious her and Joel are in a rough patch, but now she's trying to juggle a potential new relationship with a woman she didn't even know was bisexual until the previous night. But she's in the midst of processing it all in a way that is clear through her brief dialogue being delivered in a more lost but optimistic tone. But the show basically stops Ellie in her tracks so that she can give the most on-the-nose explanation of everything happening possible that also seems to be winking at the audience like, hey you, things are weird, but they're getting better, haha. Sure would be a shame if, something happened.
My shit with Joel is complicated. I know that. From the outside, it probably looks really bad. It has been really bad. But I'm still me, he's still Joel, and nothing's ever gonna change that. Ever. So you can all stop talking about us, worrying about us, and thinking about us. Alright?
So you two hash it out. Alright.
Thankfully, boom, more original content. Tommy having a town hall with everyone shows that he's a naturally charismatic and responsible leader, as well as setting up what the town does in case of emergencies. Again, something that will be important later. A few things happen, like the town setting up defenses as a snowstorm rolls in, and Abby following two unknown patrollers from Jackson, who is more than likely Joel and Dina, and Jesse and Ellie head out only to get caught in the storm and take cover in a 7-Eleven full of weed. Another show and game difference. In the show, Joel and Dina are out together, Jesse and Ellie are the pair remaining, and Tommy's back in Jackson making sure the town is reinforced for the upcoming storm. In the game, there is a storm, but it's not extremely significant. Ellie and Dina are on patrol together, Jesse is on an alternative route, and Joel and Tommy are together. While this is more of a neutral change overall, I think I just prefer the game, but it also makes sense for the show if Tommy seems to be much more noble and friendly, and might not eagerly take on this revenge quest, while Dina and Joel are more daughter-father leaning to give her more of a reason for wanting to go after Abby with Ellie. Back to the show, one reason I prefer the game's version of the scene is that it is much more slow and measured. The snowstorm isn't a massive threat, it just forced Ellie and Dina to take cover in a store full of weed where their romance blossoms under more peaceful conditions. The reason it happens here in the game is because later on, you won't really get much of a chance to. In the show, it's just Jesse and Ellie hanging out at Eugene's old weed spot. Of course, for reasons that I'm sure you can presume, nothing is going to happen between Jesse and Ellie. Jesse again implies that Eugene got bit and Joel rather swiftly put him down and he couldn't be saved, which just makes Ellie feel guilty because, maybe he could have been. We cut back to Abby, who is supposed to be on lookout but is instead trying to track down the horseback riders she saw earlier, and she ends up sliding down a hill and stumbling right into a mound of infected frozen to death. But since we heard earlier that they're using their own dead as insulation, we know what's about to happen. We get a fun chase sequence mirroring the one from the game, as well as the fence scene that I'm sure anyone claustrophobic shit themselves at, understandably so. I'll be honest, if I was being forced to crawl and I saw I had that much distance left to go, I'd probably just, give up. See if I can't reach my gun and just refuse to find out what being torn apart is like. Abby is braver than me though. She continues crawling and gets saved by Joel, just like how she is in the game. And Dina, calling for Joel's name, immediately reveals to Abby that this is who she's looking for. Some people prefer this, and I can understand why, but in the game, Tommy is the one who introduces Joel and himself to Abby because they assume that she's alone so far because she hasn't mentioned anything. She's panicked and they want to calm her down, and Tommy at this stage in his life, is a generally more noble and friendly person than Joel is. So it makes sense, in my head at least, that Tommy would introduce them. However, Abby tells Joel and Dina about the lodge, and they all run from the horde just as they break down the door. The game's action sequence is a little longer, but aside from Tommy and Dina's presence, this is pretty one-to-one with the games. Meanwhile, over in Jackson, the construction workers are still working while the snowstorm is hitting. That's not a complaint. Construction workers are kinda just like that. However, they break open the pipes full of roots, only to see that there are fungal roots in it. And as set up in Season 1, this tells the infected hive mind where Jackson is and that it's time to attack. And attack they do. Good God. The action set piece that follows cuts between Ellie and Jesse looking for Joel and Dina after they failed to check in, Joel and Dina arriving at the lodge, and Jackson under siege from a massive horde. I'll cover those things one at a time rather than how the show cuts between them to streamline things. The action scene just confirms to me that the show should have been an original story told in the game's universe, though I understand why they would have wanted to adapt the game's narrative. Show viewers might be shocked to hear that the big action scene with a horde invading Jackson was made entirely for the show and not something that happens in the zombie action adventure video game, but it is actually incredible. The spectacle of hundreds of sprinting zombies coming for a settlement in any media is always such a pants-shitting incredible sight when done well, and this show does it great. In the midst of the snowstorm, you just see them slowly emerging from the fog, and it makes you wonder how the hell they are going to handle it. The shots of the bullet casings raining down under everyone's feet as they snipe the horde from the wall is really good at showing just how much they are fighting to keep Jackson standing, and the bloater continues to be a fucking menace. Just one of them is enough to breach the wall, and the show does a great job at making them feel near invincible. There's a scene where Tommy is standing in the middle of the street with an incoming horde running toward him, as well as into the shops along the road, and he's firing at the bloater because he notices that Maria pissed it off and it's about to head for her, and he gets its attention. Meanwhile, zombies are sort of just running around him, and he only has to kill 3 of them before he manages to distract it, and no others manage to go for him. It's not realistic, at all. Tommy should be dead, but he's aura farming right now. He's a wife guy. He gets a pass. Tommy gets cornered in an alleyway though. The bloater follows him, and he just barely manages to burn it to death before it can strike him down, which is someone who has played that exact situation while doing a no-return run on Grounded. Yeah, that's basically how it feels. Maria, meanwhile, unleashes a bunch of dogs from their kennels as the infected horde are thinned out by everyone shooting at them, and the dogs go ham on them. It's really entertaining to just have this shot where dozens of dogs go apeshit on incoming hordes, just pouncing on their necks and biting the fuck out of them. It was great. And yeah, Jackson had their big final stand, managed to save themselves and put up a great fight. And I noticed that the last season used their big horde scene in a similar manner, which is to say, they tee their audience up with a massive badass action scene, and then knock them right back down with a devastating scene. Last season, they did that with Sam and Henry. This season, they do it with Joel. Dina and Joel end up arriving at the cabin, and once Abby introduces the two of them to the group, the mood shifts immediately. Dina is held by gunpoint and put to sleep by Nora, and then Abby begins to torture him. Well, I say begins to torture. Actually, she gives an extended villain monologue about how the Fireflies are dead and how her dad was the surgeon, and Joel probably guessed that at this point, and how she's been a part of a militia group for the past 5 years, and she has a code of honor, and it's just too much. Game Abby? She did not fuck around. She immediately kneecaps Joel. Tommy gets knocked the fuck out, and she gets right to it. She does not waste any time. She simply asks if Joel knows who she is, and then she grabs a golf club and gets a swinging. Show Abby takes so fucking long to actually get around to it. She goes on a yap session for so long and reveals her entire backstory, and I fear that this will only hurt the show in the long run. Some people think that Abby's motivations being revealed this early on is better than the game, but I strongly disagree. The game very intentionally withheld everything about her dad and the Fireflies because it wanted the players to wonder what could drive someone to do something as terrible as this, letting that question linger in the player's mind for hours upon hours until the second surprise half of the game pushes them to both pursue Abby, but also be more primed to understand her when they finally have that answer revealed, empathizing more with her once we see the answer come not from just someone speaking it out loud, but instead through her mind and flashbacks that show what happened and how devastating it was for her. The show revealing it right off rip might make it so that people get it on a basic level, but there will be little empathy for Abby as a character as she progresses if we have nothing left to wonder about her this early on. I'm sure show-only watchers will be hit hard by the scene, but I feel like it wouldn't be as hard as how the game did it, especially with all the turns and twists to come. That being said, Bella Ramsey's acting is incredible here. I would not be shocked if they won an Emmy from this episode. While I vastly prefer the game's handling of this scene on a writing level, Bella put their heart and soul to the scene. And yeah, that's episode 2. Joel's dead now. They did it. People on the internet have been devastated, and despite my strong disagreement with some writing decisions, it has been quite fun seeing people react like that. Especially people who have played this game for over 5 years ago and then decide to go, hey, Meemaw, Peepaw, you should watch this funny zombie show with me. It's from a game I played before. I'm sure you would enjoy it. Nothing bad happens here. While I wouldn't necessarily call this episode filler, it does take significantly longer for it to go over the points that the game basically just cruises through. And although it does contain a good bit of original content, I do have some problems with said additions. We immediately start with a great scene where, after the attack, Tommy visits where they've stored the dead from the attack. He sees Joel, who we only identify through his watch, and delivers the only dialogue in this scene.
Give Sarah my love.
I feel like this scene understands something that the game does, which is that less is more. Tommy doesn't rant about his feelings or reiterate the themes of the show in an obvious way. He simply just says something devastating that instantly locks us into how he's reacting and processing everything. We then cut to Ellie in the Jackson hospital, where the previous episode landed her after Manny kicks her in the ribs so hard that it apparently punctured a lung. She has a bit of a PTSD attack, which, again, Bella is just going hard with the acting here. And then cut to 3 months later. It's spring, Jackson has just about fully recovered from the attack, and things are looking up. And this is where things diverge from the game pretty significantly. In the game, very little time is wasted tracking down the Salt Lake crew, maybe a day or two off screen at most. But Tommy leaves very soon after Joel's death, and then Ellie and Dina follow him hours later, both to find Tommy, as well as just using that as an opportunity to take revenge for Joel. The show decides to postpone that in ways I understand on some level, but overall dislike with everything else it means. Ellie gets discharged from the hospital after recovering from the kick, but has to see Gail. I like some aspects of the scene and dislike others. I feel like adding Gail as a therapist basically gives an excuse for characters to very blatantly say how they're feeling, but at the same time it's obvious in this scene that Ellie is lying and Gail is silently calling bullshit. Ellie is not only a liar, but she is a bad one when doing it off the top of her head. That I like. After that, we get the scene from the game where Ellie walks through Joel's house. In the context of the show, this is the first time she's been able to do so since his death, whereas in the game, the pain was still so fresh that it was likely just the day before. Again, less is more. I feel like the game had a bit more going for it since it could be longer with more little things to interact with, and the show still adapts it pretty faithfully. Very little dialogue, just Ellie wandering the house, looking at it frozen in time. As if Joel isn't dead and simply just got out the house a minute ago, with all the little things remaining right where he left it. His wood carving hobby having taken off. There's little just wood shavings that are still on the table as if he literally just set it down and decided he'll clean it up later. He has all of his paintings, just everything. It's great. Ellie comes across the red box left on Joel's bed with his belongings, which is his watch and his gun. Ellie seems to give the watch a courtesy inspection, but what really matters to her is the gun. The watch isn't how she knew Joel. The gun was, and it's the gun that she ends up taking. We then get the jacket scene, which is slightly different, but not in any major way. In the show, she kind of buries her face into the jacket and starts to cry. Again, pretty good. Bella's acting is just top-notch and very enjoyable. Or at least, very impactful. Enjoyable is a strong word. But the game is overall just my preference. Ellie doesn't outright cry into the jacket in the game, but instead just buries her face in it and just inhales. The sense of smell is an unexpected sense that you only really start noticing when someone is gone. You briefly inhale something that reminds you of them, or just straight up was them, and for a split second your brain seems to tell you that that person is still there, before you logically remember, no, they're not. Ellie remembering everything about Joel, from how he protected her, the things he did, both good and bad, and the little things down to just the way his jacket smelled, is such a strong piece of imagery that really struck a chord with me. And then of course it's interrupted by Dina calling for Ellie downstairs. In the game, this is because Maria is there to ask Ellie and Dina to save Tommy before he gets himself killed, and in the show, it's just Dina. Except now she's telling Ellie everything she knows about the WLF. Overall, I think the scene is fine, and Dina backs up her reason for withholding this information for 3 months.
The doctors told me not to upset you.
I don't give a fuck.
And I knew that if I told you where they were, you'd just start pulling your tubes out and crawling on your hands and knees to get there.
I don't give a fuck. You cost us time. You let them get away.
First of all, this town was wreckage and funerals for weeks. Nobody was going to go after anyone. And then it occurred to me that if you want to find someone, and the only thing you know about them is where they're going to end up, maybe let them get there.
The two then bring the information to Tommy, who doesn't seem too thrilled about the information. He's down to send a posse to handle the Salt Lake crew the legal way, but he doesn't seem eager to go out on his own like he does in the game. This makes sense for this version of the story, where he's explicitly a leader of this community as well as having a son to take care of, whereas in the game he's not really shown to be the leader or one of the leaders of Jackson, and all he really had going for him was his relationship with Maria, which the game hints many times that that was already on rocky ground. But after that, we get our first look at the Seraphites, who haven't been named in the show, but it does leave a lot of intrigue for the audience. They're obviously very cultish between the scars and the way they all talk in unison when they hear a religious phrase.
So it was with our prophet.
But they also don't ham it up too hard in a way that I enjoy. I think one of the complaints I have about Part 2 in the game, in retrospect, is that outside of Yar and Lev, we don't get to see a lot of humanizing moments for the Seraphites as people. In this scene, we get some of that. They aren't doing anything nefarious or over the top. They explain that they're fleeing the war from the WLF, and there's a young girl who is given a hammer because she feels safe with the weapon, and we also get a look at their secret whistling language. This is neat, as in the game, we don't actually properly meet the Seraphites until Ellie's second day in Seattle. And again, we don't see a whole lot of them outside of when you have to fight them. Then cuts to Jesse and Ellie practicing with a punching bag. Jesse, during the 3-month time skip, was promoted to a council member, therefore he is going to be voting on the issue of whether or not they're going to send a group out to Seattle to avenge Joel. It's obvious he is friends with Ellie and cares about her, but he doesn't discuss upcoming votes out of principle, and doesn't reveal who or what side he's voting for. I think I like their friendship a little more as portrayed in the game. We mostly see it manifest at the start and throughout Ellie's day 3 in Seattle. Since Jesse in the game was not a part of like any council or anything, he just did everything of his own accord, they felt more as equals, casual friends, and it's a bit different than how the show paints it, especially since he acts and looks a bit older than Ellie, and the first episode mentions that he's about 4 years older than her, where in the game, since Ellie seems more mature, that difference in their attitudes isn't really noticeable. We then get to the voting scene, an entirely original scene, and for the first time in the series, I'm a bit mixed on its inclusion. Usually I love original scenes, as I mentioned before, but this one just has a part of it that puts me off a little. The parts I like are pretty strong. Again, seeing how Jackson functions and makes decisions is great. I like seeing them basically have a list of people to debate the issue. The council listens to those people, and then they vote semi-anonymously. It does start off in a pretty funny way, with one of the people debating just going on a yap session about something entirely different for a moment.
Keep saying we need to invest more in turkeys and less in chickens. And that brings me back to my earlier point about corn. Corn, some of you have heard me say, is not the easiest crop to grow, but it is among the fastest. You can plot a graph that shows ease and resources versus time to harvest and get...
Scott, I'm sorry, but we got to keep you on target here.
Well, it's an open meeting. The bylaws say that...
Maybe we should stick to what everyone else came here to discuss.
I don't really have an opinion on the Seattle thing.
And then they get to the real meat of the debate. The first person who chimes in, other than Corn Guy, I like. She just explains that Jackson would be vulnerable if they sent a bunch of their best fighters to Seattle. I wrote Salt Lake in the script, fuck. If they send a bunch of their best fighters to Seattle to go and kill a whole group of people who killed one of their own. She and many others lost family, so she understands why Ellie would want this, but in the end it's just too much risk for such little reward. The problems I have with this scene begin with the next guy they call on to voice his opinion, and it's simply because, just like the previous episode, I feel like he goes on too long and too obviously about the themes of the show. He straight up begins to preach about the virtue of mercy and forgiveness and how they can help find clarity in the face of the need for vengeance, and it's just too much. Again, less is more. The girl giving rational reasons to justify why going off to a place you don't know to kill people you don't know is a bad idea, that's good. But straight up yapping about how cool it would be if you followed the Christian values of mercy and forgiveness, it's just too much. Too much for me. It does lead to Seth having a bit of an extended role where he begins to argue back against that. He falls strictly in the pro-revenge side, and that gives Ellie some pause since this was the guy who had to apologize for getting drunk and calling her a slur just a few months ago. But now he's on her side and is advocating for her closure. both because he believes that Joel should be avenged out of principle, but also for the sake of a girl he genuinely feels bad for hurting in that way. This extension of the character, while a bit brief, is something I enjoy. Not to mention, Seth, who is played by Robert Burke, delivers the lines in a great and passionate way. Ellie then gives her speech, which tries to appeal to trusting one another as a community and maintaining their safety for one another, but her speech does not win out. The proposal is rejected, which leaves Ellie and Dina to take matters into their own hands. It is also fascinating that one of Ellie's main character traits, I feel, at least in part 2, is that she either fails to communicate her thoughts until they boil over, or even outright lie about them. This carries over in the show, where this speech she gives, while well constructed, is bullshit. I feel like that is part of why it fails to win over all but 3 of the council, and it is fascinating to see people who are won over by it in real life, because just like her, they're grieving Joel and want to see justice, but boy are they in for a treat when they find out how depraved this mission is going to become. We get a short scene after the vote between Tommy and Gail. Not much really happens in it. I do enjoy seeing the people of Jackson live a normal life. Kids are playing baseball, it's a sunny day out, Gail is drinking beer out of a cooler. It's very modern and gives the sense that this place is humanity actively rebuilding and isn't just stagnant. It's not like the recent Fallout entries where entire cities populated with civilized people with law and order still have rubble and scrap strewn about, despite the fact that the nukes landed 210 years ago. God, Bethesda, you know that at some point people would probably clean this up, right? And probably even before they get electricity and plumbing sorted out. This would just be among the first things they would take. Anyways, that aside, Ellie is about to leave on her own when Dina interrupts, insisting on coming with because Ellie isn't even prepared to take care of herself long enough to make it to Seattle, let alone to kill everyone she needs to there. And the two sneak out, helped by Seth, who provides them with Shimmer and a fancy new gun. Ellie and Seth shake on it, which is a bit of their apology accepted moment, and her and Dina take off. They do make a brief stop at the graveyard they keep out of town to say goodbye to Joel, though, where Ellie smiles while laying coffee beans on the ground. I do like this, because this is purely Ellie saying goodbye to him. Ellie, in Season 1, hated coffee. She tried it, thought it tasted like burned shit. Ellie, you're wrong. Season 2 Ellie, despite that, leaves coffee beans at his grave purely because she knew that he liked it, while smiling at the grave and maybe mentally giving him one more pun, likely something about ground coffee. Then they take off, and over a montage, Ellie and Dina get closer and closer to Seattle. They have a scene in the tent together that is a little reminiscent of their scene from the game in Eugene's weed den, but doesn't quite go as far as it did in the game. Dina asks Ellie to rate their kiss, Ellie rates it a 6, and so on. In the game, they end up having sex there, where in the show it just stops and leaves on. They're going for more of a bit of a slow burn, it looks like. There are 2 things I don't like about the show's version, though, both having to do with Dina and some of her defining character traits. One is that the show seems to have rewritten Dina to be a closeted bisexual instead of just being out. I don't have a problem with this on paper, but I feel like one of Dina's defining character traits was her unashamed confidence. Part of that confidence was her sexuality never really being in question by the time the game rolls around. When she kisses Ellie in the game, that's not her experimenting or trying out the whole Yuri thing she's heard so much about. It's her declaring her interest in Ellie regardless of gender or just anything. She knows in the game that she's over Jesse, she is still his friend, but she likes Ellie and wants to share part of her life with her, so she simply locks it in at the dance. There's no question about what happened there. In the show, the dance scene still happened, but with the inclusion of the line, "You're gay, I'm not," delivered in the way that it is, it makes the scene feel much more fleeting than it was in the game. The other problem I have has to do with another character trait, which is Dina's undying loyalty. In the game, this works both for and against her traits. She is liked by a lot of people and is willing to do anything for those she is closest to. And she's loyal to Ellie above all else once their romance begins to blossom at the dance and after their patrol together. This is tainted a bit in the show because she briefly mentions that during the 3-month time skip, she hooked up with Jesse again. It slightly waters down that loyal aspect of her, as well as her confidence despite what she's doing now, all just so we can have the pregnancy twist later that, honestly, I would have been fine with them cutting for the show. Not that I think it was done badly in the game, I actually like what it ended up meaning for the game, but the show is clearly going for something different, and I don't think it would have been necessary for it if it meant that this is what we had to do to make it happen. Oh well. Moving on, they make it to Seattle and stumble across the Seraphites we saw earlier in the episode, except they are all dead. Not just the men, but the women and children too. Ellie's on the right track guessing that the WLF did this, but uses the moment to paint Abby as a bigger monster than she is anywhere near, wondering if she personally did this to all these people, but to carry on, find Seattle, and that's where the story leaves off for this episode. We cut to Manny in the Space Needle, using it as a lookout point for the WLF. One thing I noticed, because I've played the game so many times, is that it seems they're switching up some territory ownership. The Space Needle in the game was implied to have been Seraphite territory, if I recall correctly, during Abby's Day 3 when they see it off in the distance on the Seraphite Island, whereas, obviously in the show, Manny is posted up there doing lookout for the WLF. Manny also seems to be more of a grumpy, hardened character. I think I like the game more where he was a very charismatic guy who had a lot of people, charmed. And that contrasted with his ruthlessness in combat and eagerness for the war to go on. Show Manny gives a brief lookout before giving the all clear, and the final shot of the episode is a series of armored vehicles driving down the street and a whole platoon of soldiers marching down the street that are only a small part of the WLF army, revealing to the audience that Ellie and Dina have no clue what they're really up against. This episode opens up with a bit of a flashback. It's mid-apocalypse, back when Fedra still controlled Seattle, and we're in a truck where we get a cameo from Josh Peck, who I haven't seen on the TV since I was 10. He's telling a vulgar story about how he watched a civilian getting beat up over some stupid soldier's misunderstanding of what the word disseminate means, and I like this scene because it helps humanize Fedra without just painting them as le misunderstood villain or something like that. They're bad people in a bad system, but they're still people. They joke about things that happen and get by day to day. However, the camera cuts to a man played by Jeffrey Wright. At first I was thinking, oh, hey, they got Jeffrey Wright. He played Isaac in the first game. That's cool. And it wasn't until they actually called him Isaac that I realized he's not just here for a cameo, he's reprising the same role, the same way Merle Dandridge did for Marlene back in Season 1. This is a completely new scene, as Isaac in the game is mostly mentioned and only really shows up, I believe, twice. But the show seems much more eager to show him off, and that's fine by me. He's a fascinating character to occasionally follow, and I won't complain about getting to see more of Jeffrey Wright flexing his acting chops. It gives us a peek at how Isaac joined the WLF. In the game, I think it was more implied that he started it in some way. A lot of the posters left by Fedra that you see in the first day of Seattle have him wanted for the usual stuff, like killing an officer and evading arrest and making propaganda for the WLF, but I don't think they mentioned that he was a deserting Fedra soldier. I could be mistaken. That detail might have just slipped my mind. It's only on a poster that I believe you just have to find and kind of just aim at in order to read. But in short, Isaac ends up killing a truck full of his own soldiers when they confront the wolves, and he proves their loyalty to them. And the one soldier he spared has a choice on whether or not to join the guys in the truck or join the WLF. It's not clear on whether this will become a major plot point later on, so I'm just mentioning that the guy who joins Isaac and the WLF exist and shows up briefly later. It cuts back to present day, where Ellie and Dina arrive in Seattle proper. The two are searching a pharmacy for supplies when Dina comes across something that prompts her to say that she has to pee. 100% confirmation that we are definitely getting our pregnancy plot. They wander around a little bit, and we get a few things from the games back to back. Ellie sees the pride rainbows on the streets, and neither of them really knows what it means, which is a kind of neat world-building thing, but also kind of tragic in a way. They also head into the music store, and Ellie plays Take On Me on the guitar, just like in the game. Bella Ramsey actually has a pretty good, soft singing voice, and meanwhile, Dina's actress, I don't know if I mentioned she's played by Isabella Merced, she's pulling off some great acting here, and she has a pretty emotional response to Ellie's song. The two decide to rest before approaching the TV station they see is marked with WLF tags, and in between that time we get another totally original Jeffrey Wright scene. He's going on about how he used to cook for women he liked because he was more nervous about talking to them directly, and it seems mundane at first, but if you listen in, you can hear very subtle chain rattling noises, and it's revealed that he's talking to a Seraphite prisoner, stripped down and beaten up in a way that I can't quite show on YouTube, because despite the fact that every other industry is fine with it, YouTube and other sites like it like to throw the biggest fit at the sight of non-sexual nudity. He's torturing the Seraphite prisoner rather unsuccessfully, and he's using the pans and pots that he mentioned because he says that copper maintains heat well. And then he places the heated copper pan on the Seraphite's hand in order to hurt him. And I do have to say, I like this scene overall, but one detail I kind of was dragged out by was the fact that the Seraphite literally screams, "The blood!" Like, I mean, obviously he delivers the line better than that while screaming in pain, but I feel like screaming in pain was enough, because the moment he screamed the phrase, I just thought to myself, that was a little much. I feel like, again, less is more. I feel like they should have just had him scream in pain. I feel like that's enough. He didn't need to go, "My leg!" whenever he got hurt. It was just a little bit too much salt sprinkled in on your otherwise perfectly fine chicken meal. The two argue briefly about who started the war, who broke the treaty, but Isaac simply doesn't care about who started it. He just wants to end it, and do so violently. The Seraphite argues that their side will win despite not having the same advanced technology, because every day, a wolf leaves to join the Seraphites, but the Seraphites never do the same. And also, Isaac, you're old enough to remember the Vietnam War being a thing. You gotta know that military might isn't everything. At some point, Isaac realizes that the information he wants from the Seraphite isn't going to come out, so he just caps him. The two guards standing outside react differently. One is shaken by having to hear such a violent interrogation, while the other thinks it was totally justified. The camera pans over to the latter, revealing it's the guy from the flashback who was given the choice to join Isaac and the WLF in their infancy. Back to Ellie and Dina. It's nighttime now, and they move into the TV station. It's pretty similar to the game, aside from the fact that the game took place during the day. They expect to find wolves, but instead they find corpses riddled with arrows and multiple WLF soldiers strung up and raining red spaghetti out of their stomachs. Ellie recognizes the Seraphite symbol drawn on the wall, confirming that they are responsible and that no faction is going to act nice to them during their Finnish vacation to Washington. Because the timing could not be worse, a bunch of WLF soldiers come bursting in and hope to find the Seraphites who did this. I have a small problem with this piece of dialogue. I think the game handled it fine when the soldiers were just horrified and agreed to fan out looking for the Seraphites, but in the show, one soldier is so pissed that he says something a little different.
The rest of you fan out, and go slow. If the scars are still here, find them and kill them.
Isaac said he wants them alive for questioning.
Well, Isaac's not here, okay? With intestines all over the fucking place, so I don't really give a shit. I don't give a shit if it's a woman or a kid. Look, I don't care if it's a fucking baby. Look what they did.
Call me the Winter Soldier with how many times I say again, but less is more. It is obvious that these people are upset already, but I don't need one of them to literally say, the other side of this conflict I refuse to understand is so monstrous that I'll even kill their babies because they're so guilty of the sins of their fathers, and we could have let this conflict go at any time, but we choose to perpetuate it, so I'm gonna get fucking angry. Raw. Ellie and Dina have a brief stealth section that goes about as well as the average stealth attempt on grounded difficulty goes in the games, getting spotted as she chokes someone out. Dina kills the soldier about to take Ellie out, and Ellie knifes the one that she's got in the throat, and they both escape to the subway tunnels. This entire next section is a bit more abridged than the game, especially because the game takes longer in the tunnels and uses that section to introduce the Shamblers. So far, I have no clue if they're even going to introduce the Shamblers in the show, and I'm starting to doubt it at this rate. But they were more of like a gameplay surprise that threw things off from the first game to introduce more types of infected, rather than an important story thing. Once the two make it, they get to the underground subway tunnels, and it is surreal seeing a location you have known and explored rather thoroughly in the game being portrayed pretty accurately in live action, and apparently it was the same way on set. The WLF throw out some flares, giving the area its iconic look of being bathed in red, menacing light as something worse comes for both sides of this fight. It turns out one of the flares landed on those hive mind spore stalks, which brings a whole horde down on them. Dina also does the thing where she attempts to count, which is a throwback to the first episode where she counted that there were 2 clickers instead of 1 by being able to recognize their distinct enough voices through the clicks, but Dina starts to count so many that it stops mattering and she gives up. The WLF get taken out pretty quick, and Ellie and Dina make a run for it. The scene sort of combines too from the game, since the game had it so that this horde encounter and the WLF fight in the train station were separate scenes. I am quite glad to see that, unlike the last season, their big zombie horde set piece wasn't a one and done thing. Season 1, I think I mentioned, had minimal infected presence after the Sam and Henry episode. Meanwhile, this season seems to be pulling out all the stops. They have a pretty intense action sequence where they're trapped inside of a train that infected are slowly pouring into until they manage to climb out of the roof hatch. They make a run for the subway exit, but on the way out, Ellie gets bit protecting Dina. This is slightly different from the game where Ellie's gas mask breaks and she's breathing in spores, but since spores don't exist in the show as of yet, they couldn't really do that.
Ellie, your mask!
Either way, Dina now sees that Ellie has done something that should get her killed, but doesn't. She doesn't know she's immune yet, and once they take shelter at the theater, she almost shoots her, but Ellie explains her immunity. To prove it, she goes to sleep, wakes up just fine. I like this mostly because it's a nice callback to season 1 where Tess and Joel do the same thing to ensure Ellie is actually immune, so in her mind, this is the best way possible to prove it. After Ellie's nap, Dina confesses that she is pregnant, and this is where the show and game so far diverge the hardest, in my opinion. In the show, this is where This is where Dina and Ellie have sex. It makes sense, they're obviously into each other, and they just got out of an intense situation where Dina thought she lost Ellie forever, but is incredibly lucky enough that she's the one person in the world who can't get infected. The morning after, they properly talk about it, and Ellie's reaction to Dina being pregnant is rather positive and wholesome. I already mentioned that in the game, Ellie and Dina having sex happened forever ago, before Joel even died. It already happened, and Ellie's reaction to Dina's pregnancy is way more negative, feeling like she was holding out on Ellie. She even goes as far to imply that Dina is a burden on the mission now, showing her where her priorities are. I fall strictly into preferring the game camp. Obviously, we won't see the far-reaching implications of the scene until later, but I enjoyed a lot of the thematic and messy drama between the characters, and the game kept that tension up. Not to mention that the way that Ellie calls Dina a burden is pretty fucking mean, but she is very much channeling Joel in that moment. She kind of unknowingly took in this aspect of the man that left her life so abruptly in order to try and keep him alive, including the toxic parts of him, which also includes saying the sort of mean-spirited thing that he would say whenever he got upset by something surprising.
We could have still turned back.
I didn't know. I wasn't sure, okay? I didn't want to be a burden.
Well, you're a burden now, aren't you?
And you just hang back like I told you to.
Well, you're glad I didn't, right?
I'm glad I didn't get my head blown off by a goddamn kid.
While the game had Ellie go off on her own for a while to secure the theater and end the day with a flashback, the show has the two hear on a radio they snatched that Nora is active in a building. I forget the name of the building in the show, I just remember that in the game it was the hospital. Dina looks at her map, looks up, points out that the building is way off in the distance, seeing that it is across an active war zone. Ellie suggests Dina should stay back, but unlike the game, Dina doesn't relent. Rather, she insists on coming with. This will be interesting as day 2 of Seattle is where Ellie is alone, and you can just see how much more aggressive and depraved she becomes in the game when she doesn't have to wear a sort of mask around Dina. If you pay attention, Game Ellie is so mean during her time alone. She starts insulting the enemy as she kills them, and if things go loud, she'll even taunt the enemies alive after killing their friends. So Dina deciding to stay with Ellie during day 2 could have interesting implications for the future. I guess we'll have to see how that plays out because again, as of writing and recording this, episode 5 hasn't come out yet. This episode opens with the sort of cold open that the show almost always nails. And this time we get a peek at the WLF, and them working at the hospital. We see a higher-ranking officer interrogating one of the leaders she gives orders to, because apparently she gave an order that got a bunch of her own soldiers killed. She explains that her soldiers were clearing out the basement floors of the hospital when one reported in saying, quote, "It's in the air, seal us in." First off, a trope I often just personally enjoy is the soldier who knows they're fucked telling their higher-ups to do something that will get them killed for the greater good trope. It's a long-winded way of saying that they're willing to sacrifice themselves, but it's a very particular way of going about it that I just enjoy. But second off, we now know that spores exist in this universe. Or that when left alone long enough, the cordyceps can mutate to start producing spores from their hosts. The officer tells the woman that she's all clear and that she did the right thing before just one final stinger.
I'm sorry about your son.
It's simple, clinical, and just adds one more punch in the gut for the scene before it cuts to the opening credits. It's nice, it's sweet, and it is the show, for once in this season, going for that less is more approach instead of overindulging too much. We see Ellie had turn on the generator like in the game, and that Dina is triangulating the WLF patrols so that she can find a safe way for them to sneak to the hospital through. They have some cute banter here, but one thing is starting to become a bigger problem from the scene, and it is the fact that Ellie is a little stupid. This goes hand in hand with the fact that mentally it feels like the writers aged her down compared to the game. Game Ellie was grieving, wrathful, and basically suicidal with everything she's doing, but she's also incredibly resourceful and calculating. Game Ellie absolutely knows how to triangulate stuff. She just doesn't because Dina was already on it, and she doesn't want to awkwardly interrupt her because she said a really terrible thing to her. Show Ellie actually does not know what the act of triangulating is. The things that Dina is good at that Ellie isn't is more reasonable in the game because you get the sense that Ellie would have either figured it out or found another way more befitting her. It feels like she is the same child that she once was in Season 1, where you can very obviously tell that Game 1 and Game 2 Ellie are different people after she grows up a bit. Ellie then hangs out for a bit in the theater where she grabs a guitar and strums out the first tiny bit of Pearl Jam's Future Days, which is a nice touch, but this audience doesn't actually know the significance of that song yet, whereas in the game, that particular moment is calling back to the start of the game, where the audience saw Joel teaching Ellie how to play guitar, starting with that song. Dina interrupts when she enters the theater and explains that she found a way to get through the WLF. She found a gap in their patrol route that leads to the hospital, and they reason it's probably because the building they don't patrol is full of infected, but they agree to sneak through and give it a shot. We see later on, as Ellie and Dina travel on foot to their destination, that there was a Seraphite mural, one proclaiming to feel her love, but it's been defaced by the WLF with an insult and executed Seraphites underneath it. This scares Ellie a bit, because now that Dina is for sure pregnant, she's having second thoughts. If you listen carefully, it's not that she's thinking of stopping the mission, she's just thinking of bringing Dina back to Jackson than coming by herself, which is a lot, but she's probably not thinking totally rationally. But Dina tells her the story about her first kill. In the game, this was a much more casual conversation, but in the show, this seems to be the crux of her motivation. Someone killed her sister and mother, and when Dina arrived too late to save them, she shot the man dead. But she says if she was made to watch it happen like Ellie was with Joel, she would have hunted the man down for as long as it took. I don't quite know how I feel about this. It's pretty clear in the game that Dina went with Ellie for her sake. Not that she lacked agency, but she is a very loyal person who just wants to see her friends make it to the closure they seek, and of course remain alive to find it. She didn't need to take revenge because she already knew that home was the best option for her. But she knew that Ellie and Tommy weren't going to just take what happened laying down, so she tries to at least see it through for her. This is going to be a little weird when later on in the series, Dina is supposed to be the one who hunkers down at home and just finally breaks and tells Ellie that going for this revenge mission is awful, and she draws a line in the sand where she says, like, if you go after Abby again, we're over, we're done. I don't see show Dina doing this with the little amount of time she has left to develop her character. Giving Dina a personal reason to hunt down the Salt Lake crew is an understandable impulse, but I feel like that just waters down her character because now she's basically just Ellie, except smarter and calmer. We cut to later in the night. They make it to the building, agreeing that shooting is a last resort, and Dina saying that Ellie is a bit reckless, which, given the first episode, we have seen that firsthand. Sneaking around until they come across the reason the building is abandoned, because it's full of not just infected, but stalkers. I really like how the flashlight glints off the eyes of the one they spot. It's really freaky and reminds me of a hunting camera video. Once they realize that they are surrounded by them, Ellie rushes Dina to a cage while she distracts as many as she can. They swarm the both of them, the infected just piling on Ellie while Dina is nearly taken in the cage when she runs out of ammo, but someone quickly manages to save the day. For a second, I almost thought that it was like a WLF soldier responding to the noise they've made because, despite agreeing to not to, Ellie ends up shooting. But then I remembered, wait, no, I don't think they're doing Hillcrest. It's Jesse. Yeah, it's Jesse. Confirming what I thought this adaptation would do. I think I mentioned earlier in the game that Tommy in the game left first, and then Ellie and Dina left, and then Jesse followed them, so it was a big old conga line of revenge. Whereas the show condenses that with Ellie and Dina leaving first, and then Tommy and Jesse going after them together. Jesse escorts them and they all flee from the WLF, who are giving chase after hearing the gunfire, until they make it to a park where the soldiers dare not go, quickly discovering that this is Seraphite territory. In the game, Ellie was still alone for this section and is briefly ambushed. This is the first time that players actually see the Seraphites in the game after it teases them for quite a long time. The three take cover and watch as a soldier is ceremoniously disemboweled, and in their attempts to sneak away, an arrow flies and hits Dina in the leg. This part confuses me a bit, because it's very good for shock factor, but like, did a Seraphite see them and just fire once? Did they fire blindly because they saw a bush move and they aren't too sure if they hit something? Or, I don't know. It was framed a little weird, especially since they take a good bit to actually get up and then the Seraphites call them out. It was weird. The three stay still for a moment longer when they've realized Dina's been hit, so it's, yeah, it's either a Seraphite blindly fired or they're really slow at lining up a second shot. In the game, Ellie is hit in the shoulder, which, by the way, I listened to the podcast. Craig Mazin, you got that wrong. Ellie is hit in the shoulder, not the leg. Get owned, true Last of Us fan. But yeah, Ellie gets hit in the shoulder and tumbles into a ditch during the ambush. And after pulling out the arrow, you control her and take her elsewhere, while the Seraphites look at where you landed, losing track of you. If you as the player stay there for longer than a couple of seconds, they will find you. You have to crawl away and actively hide again so that they can't see you again. So it's understandable that they didn't have eyes on you in the game. But the show, they just kind of stayed in the same place for an extra 10 seconds looking at Dina's fucked up leg before they get up and start running. It was weird. Whatever. So Jesse picks up Dina and runs with her while Ellie draws their fire, giving them a chance to escape, and Ellie promises that she'll catch up with them. And when she sneaks away from them successfully, instead of going to the theater, she finds a way to the hospital. She manages to sneak past a guard and a dog, and crawls through some cracked walls until she eventually comes across Nora. The interrogation scene plays similarly to the game. Ellie talks to Nora. Nora doesn't answer where Abby is. She starts to sound like she's appealing to Ellie by describing how horrible the thing they did to Joel was, before breaking it by calling him a bitch and throwing shit at Ellie. They give chase, which leads to the quarantine section of the hospital. The scene is one-to-one with the game, with some differences, but there are some things I like. One is Ellie channeling her inner Batman when she is torturing Nora. And two is how they use the opportunity to parallel Ellie's torture of Nora with Abby's torture of Joel, both of them with a metal blunt objects going for the legs as they beat their target. One thing I don't quite like is the fact that Nora outright tells Ellie why everything is happening. In the game, all Nora reveals at this point is that they were Fireflies. This is the point of the game where you even start to discover the origins of the Seattle/Salt Lake crew. The game never tells the audience that Abby is taking revenge because she is a Firefly, and also it was specifically her dad that Joel killed. All that Nora reveals is that she is a Firefly. And she never really says that outright in a way. She basically just recognizes Ellie, if I recall correctly, and Ellie just figures only a Firefly would know who I am by the fact that I'm breathing in spores. Nora in the show, meanwhile, tells Ellie that Abby killed Joel because Joel killed her dad. I feel like a major theme of the game, and one of its core foundations, was the idea of having an enemy you never fully come to understand, but ultimately letting go of them anyways. There's a reason that when Abby confronts Ellie at the end of day 3 in the game, Ellie incorrectly summarizes what happened to Abby because she's not actually aware of her true motivations. Ellie, now knowing, just feels like that entire theme is gone for both her and the audience. It's one of those snowball things that is small at first, but will no doubt continue to roll and grow bigger and bigger. Bella Ramsey, though, again, I see hate online because, oh, they're not good for Ellie and shit, but scenes like this really tell me that I think the problem is just some of the writing decisions, because they are putting on a fucking show. They nail it. They are brutal and monstrous in the way that I love seeing, because this is exactly what Ellie is in that scene, and I just feel like it is mostly just the writing and also just people being weird about how they look, even though people don't hire actors based off of purely how they look. That's why every Tumblr fan cast is like, I think Odysseus should be played by Tom Holland. Actually, I think he's playing Telemachus in that upcoming movie, whatever. I'm not sure how the next few episodes will play out, since there are only 2 more. If I had to guess, the next one might be a flashback that ends with Ellie returning to the theater, revealing that she tortured Nora for the information, and then the finale will be all of day 3. I guess we'll see. I mean, you will see in just a second because you're watching this in the future. I'm currently recording this on Tuesday the 13th, so yeah, I don't know, but maybe I'm an oracle right now. My prediction was correct, and I am a damn genius. Or at least this episode's prediction was correct, but come on, where are they leaving the season off on the next episode? Up front, I have to say that this is easily the best episode of the season. This is to Season 2 what Bill and Frank's episode was to Season 1. And it's so good for reasons I'll elaborate on later. The episode opens up with a surprising flashback I wasn't expecting, with a teenage Joel in the 80s anticipating his father's return after some sort of altercation. Tommy is afraid he's going to be beaten, but this scene shows us that Joel has already been raised as something of a protector for his family, or at least this is the part of his life where he's really coming into that sort of phase. Giving a character like Joel a backstory that wasn't in the first game is a pretty ballsy move, because there are some parts of the show that they obviously didn't want to touch too much, like the survival bit in the first episode was, despite them adding a little bit more into the scene as like set dressing and just moments with Joel, nothing really changed or showed too much more of his character that game players wouldn't already have known existed. This contextualizes a lot, it took a lot of guts, and I liked it. Anyways, their dad walks in, played by Tony Dalton, who was one of the highlights of Better Call Saul, and a pleasant surprise to see here. In this scene, he basically talks to Joel and admits to the worst parts of himself after seeing Joel got in trouble protecting his family rather than for any selfish reason. Telling him the story about how he stole a candy bar as a kid and his grandfather punched him so hard that he broke his jaw and nearly died. He compares this to how he apparently hits Tommy and Joel, like giving spankings and like using a belt rather than beating the shit out of them, though even he admits that he often goes way too far and that this is even like, it's an improvement on shit, but it's still shit, that sort of thing. And he hopes that when Joel has a kid of his own in the future, he does a little better until the worst impulses of doing that to your children and loved ones are bit by bit phased out in the future. This scene is fucking incredible and is among my favorites in the entire show. The writing is sharper than most of this season, it flows really naturally, and it lets these characters speak for themselves in a way I felt was lacking for a good chunk of the season. Tommy is young and naive in the scene, only amplified further because, well, he's a child, and Joel is hardened and willing to throw himself into dangerous situations if it means his loved ones will be safe. And I guess you'd call it retroactive foreshadowing. Yeah, it does that for later events that Joel will go through, not knowing that 20 years from now the apocalypse is going to strike. Then we get an interesting framing device from this scene onward. It's that until the very end, we follow Joel and Ellie year by year during Ellie's progressing birthdays. The first one is pretty positive. This is the height of happiness for the two. Joel builds and plays guitar, recreating the opening scene of the first game, and show Ellie seems much more receptive to it than game Ellie. Most people playing the game for the first time won't pick up on it, but game Ellie's reactions to this are very awkward and intentionally stilted, because she's still coming off of the very recent arrival at Jackson, where Joel, likely just days or a few weeks earlier, lied to her, and she knows it. Show Ellie seems to file away Joel's lie rather than confront it mentally and hang on to it, so she's much more happy to celebrate birthdays with him and listening to him sing Pearl Jam for her. We jump 1 year later from her 15th birthday to her 16th, and we recreate the museum sequence. Ellie climbs the dinosaur, and then they explore this space part of the museum. She puts on a helmet and listens to the recording that Joel found of a rocket being sent into space and immerses herself in the scene. It's pretty one-to-one with the game. I do have to say, and this goes for the whole episode, but I really like how this episode was shot in its entirety. I've noticed that games and film tend to be shot differently, where game shots and cinematic scenes often move more, follow the characters, and establish scenes in kind of more stylized ways, where film is often slow and sometimes more static because you are working with a physical camera and sometimes you just don't have the same control over it that you would a digital camera inside of a completely computer-generated scene. But this episode was directed by Neil Druckmann, who directed the games, so he translated a lot of that style to the film medium, and it makes for a very engaging episode just to watch, while maintaining that visual storytelling the games are good at. Like, say what you want about Neil Druckmann, and trust me, there is plenty to say. Take it from me. I won't get into a lot of that in this funny haha show review video, but there's plenty to criticize about him and Naughty Dog and the leadership that they were made to work under. But yeah, say what you want about him. But he has a solid enough directing style that is very notable when it pops out this episode. I also noticed that, as I mentioned earlier, this episode excels at show don't tell. Characters rarely explain how they're feeling, and if they do in this episode, it's because there's something being left unsaid, and that missing part of what they're saying feels more pronounced because of that. It's more in line with the sharper writing of the games, and I appreciate it immensely. I don't know the inner workings of the show, of course, so I can't say that this is all attributed to Neil Druckmann being director of the episode, but the episode, for one reason or another, feels different from the rest of the season. Just before the next birthday we're shown, the two leave the museum and Ellie stops to look at something in the woods. Joel asks what's up and Ellie says nothing and ventures on. The camera then pans to what she was looking at and we see a bunch of fireflies. The bug, not the people.
There are firefly people?
This is the one case where the show displays more subtlety than the game. In the game, Ellie and Joel find the firefly symbol spray painted onto a wall, and if I remember correctly, it like had the word liars written under it or something like that, because they ended up being unable to follow through on their promise for a cure, and that moment kind of just makes Ellie just feel awful, because deep down she knows that that was kind of like not her fault, but she was the catalyst for what was supposed to be the cure. In the show, it's just the little group of bugs. It shows us, not tells us, that Ellie is still thinking about that day, planting a seed of doubt in her regarding her relationship with Joel that blossoms year by year. Now we are on her 17th birthday, where Joel arrives from patrol early but ends up catching Ellie making out and getting a tattoo from Kat. By the way, we don't see Kat in the game, she's only mentioned off screen, but the way she's played in the scene is very funny and charming. I can see why Ellie had something going on with her for a bit. After being caught, Joel becomes more dad than we have ever seen, game or show. I feel like anyone who has been caught either smoking weed or having a gay relationship when they were younger by a parent will relate very hard to Ellie here, and the words Joel says being shockingly grounded and potentially familiar to those people. Joel doesn't seem outright put off by the fact that Ellie likes girls, but I think the part that hurts him the most was just the fact that he didn't know. Even if it's not rational, some parents will almost feel deceived if they catch you showing interest in the same gender rather than coming out to them first. Like you're keeping a secret from them, reminding them that you're growing up and you won't be sharing all of your life with them anymore. It's something that, again, just feels raw and true to add, especially knowing that these writers are themselves parents. Ellie attempts to shove her mattress out of the room and attempts to defiantly move into the garage, but Joel stops her. As we know in the future, Ellie indeed ends up moving into Joel's garage, but how it happens is that he just takes a breath, calms down, thinks the situation through, and starts to realize that Ellie is at the age where she might want her own space, just to grow more. So he says that rather than trying to haul the bare mattress in the middle of a thunderstorm, he'll fix up the garage and help her move in. He then takes a moment to admire the unfinished tattoo that she's got after the shock wears off, and he comes to admire it, both as a piece of art as well as something belonging to Ellie of her own volition. Joel goes to ask Gale about the tattoo, specifically what the moth means, because he's desperate to figure it out and what it means to Ellie just to relate to her, but also, in general, he's curious. I was so scared that Gale was going to just outright say what it means, but instead she says that it's believed they represent death in dreams. And I was really afraid and ready to roll my eyes if they just outright stated that moths are attracted to light, aka Ellie is a moth and she's still looking for the light. But thank God, this episode shows a little restraint. We cut to 2 years later, rather than just one, to Ellie's 19th birthday. She's practicing asking Joel about his lie with the fireflies before he knocks on the door, and when she answers, any potential that she might push him on this is interrupted by him offering to go on her first patrol with her, which is something she's wanted for a while and she's very excited by, so she kind of files the whole firefly lie away. They explore a trail, but then they get radioed, being told that Eugene is in trouble on patrol and that they're the closest people to him. They set off to find him, and since we know in the future that he's already dead, and apparently Joel killed him in a way that Gale resents, we can see where this is going. He's found with a bite on his chest, but it's recent and he has enough time to get back to Jackson to say goodbye to Gale. Joel is ready to kill him, but Ellie does the same test given to her by the Fireflies in Season 1 to determine how long he has. Like, hold out your hand and count from 1 to 10 very slowly and clearly. Joel apparently relents and tells Ellie to find the horses, promising to keep Eugene alive long enough to make it to Jackson. And then he lies. Instead of taking Eugene to Ellie with the horses, he takes him to a secluded spot to kill him. Eugene begs, in a really well-done performance by, I believe it's pronounced Joe Pantoliano, I hope I pronounced that right, to let Joel see his wife's face one last time. But Joel refuses, and tells him that if you love someone, you can always see their face. Eugene shuts his eyes and says that he can see Gale, and then the volume muffles. It zooms out on the lake where you don't hear a gunshot, just a dull vibration as birds fly off. When the camera cuts back to them, Eugene is dead. Ellie arrives and is clearly shaken by what happens, and they return to Jackson with Eugene's body bag being dragged behind them, the same way that Joel was back in episode 2. Joel attempts to lie to smooth things out with Gale, saying that Eugene died bravely and he ended it himself and says he loves you, yada yada, but Ellie cuts in and calls bullshit right in front of him, telling Gale that Eugene wanted to come, had time to, but didn't. Then she tells Joel,
"You swore."
Again, I'm so glad that they don't just elaborate on this over and over again. It's just the fact that Joel made a promise to Ellie again, and then lied again, and that's what sets her off. Both like her just finally accepting that, yeah, Joel lied to me in my face and I just ate it up, or at least filed it away and decided to ignore it. It's great that they let you just come to that conclusion rather than just Ellie turning to Joel and saying, "You lied to me again," and then walking off. Like, yeah. But yeah, another promise broken from him being too much to bear, and it officially fractures their relationship to become what it was in episode 1. Also, Joel's final moment with Eugene parallels his own in a way I really like, because again, show doesn't just tell you this, it infers it. The last thing Joel says to Eugene is about how you can see the face of those you love no matter what before you die. And of course, the last thing Joel ever sees is Ellie's face. After such a beating and just everything that happened with Abby, it's possible Joel didn't really register just how much of Ellie being there was real. For all he knew, maybe she was like a ghost in that moment, something he'll miss when he isn't able to return home, or maybe he knew she was there and just held on to that final sight as the last memory he'd ever have, not even acknowledging Abby after a while, when all the pain is dulled and he's just left broken and laying down and taking in the sight of the person he loves the most in his life. Then we cut to 9 months later at the New Year's party. We basically just see Joel's perspective from that night when he shoved Seth to the ground and repeats Ellie's lines. Now that the audience has the full context of what built up so much resentment from her, then we finally get the porch scene. I mentioned earlier I was scared that this might not happen, but I was still holding out, and I'm glad I held out. The two talk, and Joel confesses everything he did finally. The major change of the scene from game to show is that Ellie had found out a few months or years back that Joel had killed the Fireflies, because she took the horse back to Salt Lake to investigate the remains of the abandoned hospital herself, whereas the show decides to condense that down and combine it with this scene, where she instead just has Joel admit it. This comes down to preference, but I enjoyed the game a bit more, just because it gave enough time for that resentment to settle before moving on to forgiveness. Where the show has the confession immediately followed up by Ellie pitching the idea of trying to forgive him. That gives the audience the full context behind everything between their dynamic changing, as well as what exactly changed between episode 1 and 2 for Ellie's attitude towards Joel to shift so suddenly. Obviously, another difference is that this scene was withheld until the very end of the second game, where this story is only reaching the halfway point towards the end of the second season. But I can understand it because it is a very important scene for the two of them, and having to basically hold off on it just to follow the game structure for another 1 to 2 year wait would be probably frustrating. And also, this is just an aside, but when it comes to the acting, again, top notch. The writing might have some issues for me, but everyone is bringing their A game, and it's especially clear in this scene between the two of them, between Joel feeling guilty not for having done what he did, but for lying about it, and the fear of losing her setting in, but him just having to accept that that might happen, versus Ellie slash fucking Bella Ramsey. That name like briefly just turned into a void in my head, but I pulled it right back out. And both Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are just doing incredible, and Bella Ramsey does a really good job at that frustrated, depressed, directionless feeling in their character. It's incredible. Then, just like my genius self predicted earlier, we get one final shot of Ellie in the present day returning to the theater. I was expecting and hoping for a little more, like Ellie actually making it into the theater, and then, you know, all of them, Jesse, potentially Tommy. I don't know if they're going to have Tommy still missing, and then that makes them leave for episode 3. I imagine that's how it's going to go. And Dina, all of them just talking about what Ellie did, and Ellie's like, Abby's over here, and we gotta find Tommy, and that might create a lot of conflict between Ellie and Jesse. We'll see. But yeah, on some level, I was correct in my psychic predictions, and yeah, that's episode 6. My favorite episode of the season so far, and probably among the top 3 of the series. It didn't get me anywhere close to tears like the Bill and Frank episode did, but still pretty damn good when it comes to telling a story. So unless if the finale blows it out of the water, it's staying up there. But I have a feeling that since I already know what's probably going to happen, it isn't going to wow me like this one generally did. All I have to say is, for this finale, is that I have a little bit of a wish list. 1, don't show Tommy getting shot. I know he lives, obviously, but I feel like him getting shot when he returned to the theater from Abby's point of view was a really shocking and effective scene, especially just how cold and quick it was, because to you, that's Tommy. That's like the last of the Miller family by blood. And you see him, you think you see him getting shot in the head, but like then you find out later the bullet only skimmed the side of his head and took out his eye. But for a second you think, holy shit, Tommy just biffed it. But Abby doesn't care, because she doesn't quite know who the hell Tommy is other than Joel's brother and ex-Firefly. And I feel like just the fact that she moves on so quickly from that leaves this like really effective cold feeling in me the first time I played it, and I hope they maintain that and save it for the 3rd season, or apparently 4th. They're thinking of splitting Abby's section into a 3rd and 4th season, which I really hope they don't do, because they don't need to do that. If you can tell Joel and Ellie's story in one season, you can tell Abby and Lev's story in one season. Just keep it nice, keep it condensed. You don't need to elaborate that much on it. Also, the 2, don't show Lev. I feel like a great source of tension from Abby's half of the story was the fact that you didn't see Lev in the theater. It made you fear for his survival, because when you start to get to know him more and he develops more, you're thinking, man, I really like this kid. Oh, fuck. Why wasn't he at the theater? Oh, shit. But then it surprises you when it turns out he was at the theater, just hiding off screen with his bow at the ready. So, y'all already know the answer if you watch the show. But here I am, it's the 20th. I'm waiting just under a week for the next one, so let's see how they pull it off. We finally made it to the finale, and I have to say, while this episode is overall flawed but okay, it still doesn't quite hold a candle to the game for me. The episode opens with Jesse trying to rip the arrow out of Dina's leg once they made it back to the theater, and Dina rejects alcohol and talks about why she needs to live, which we find out later is enough to clue Jesse into what is actually happening with her, and then soon after that, Ellie shows up. We get the scene where Dina cleans off Ellie's scarred up back, and she explains what happened with Nora. Again, I vastly prefer the game's version of this scene. If you look at Ellie and how she's acting in the game, she is clearly dissociating. All she relays coherently is that she made Nora talk, and that she knows Abby is at the aquarium. Dina doesn't say much, but you can tell just by looking at her and all the just micro expressions in her animations that she's thinking, God damn, Ellie is killing herself with this. And that starts to sow a lot more doubt in her mind that this is the best course of action for Ellie. The show, meanwhile, has Ellie relay once again that she knows that Abby killed Joel because Joel shot her dad in the head, and her dad was the doctor at Salt Lake City, and she wanted revenge, and now she's blah, 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 blah. It probably wouldn't be as annoying if we haven't heard those exact same words being spouted multiple times in the show. It's also why back in episode 5 I much preferred the game's version of events, because they didn't reveal this much, nor did they need to. They do something in the scene, however, that I prefer just a little bit more over the game, and it's that Nora's torture in the game straight up tells Ellie that Abby is in the aquarium. It happens off screen, but, you know, Ellie says that's what happened. The show, meanwhile, implies that between the beatings and the infection taking root in Nora, that her mind just started to break down, and all she managed to say during it was wheel and whale, likely because she's just describing her memories of the location rather than giving it up voluntarily, because she probably has no clue what is happening. She is not lucid while the infection's taking root, and she's getting the shit beaten out of her. Anyways, they rest up, and the next morning has Jesse and Ellie leaving the theater to go to the rendezvous point where Tommy should be finding them at. Along the way, they stumble into a group of WLF chasing a young Seraphite and capturing him. He's no doubt going to be tortured and probably killed, but while Ellie wants to save him, Jesse keeps the two in hiding, arguing that this isn't their war to get involved in. The two argue after the kid has been taken away once they make it back to the bookstore. Jesse is obviously a good guy who thinks that this was all a waste of time and stupidly dangerous, and he just wants to get out of this place now that he knows he's going to be a father. And he also admits that he still has feelings for Dina and wants what's best for her, but can recognize that Dina likes Ellie. The tension comes from the fact that Jesse sees Ellie in her current state of mind and knows that Dina might not be safe if she basically asks how high every time Ellie asks her to jump off a cliff with her. I do like parts of their dynamic here. One thing I criticize the game for is that I think everybody in the Ellie/Jackson side for the first chunk of the game is a bit too eager for revenge. Game Jesse volunteers to help Ellie the same way Dina does, and even says that he's there to avenge Joel because he looked up to him. Meanwhile, Show Jesse is actively pushing back against Ellie much more. While I overall prefer their more equal dynamic in the game, the show does at least deliver on that front. Basically someone to counteract Ellie's rage and hypocrisy, and to try to drag them back home. We also get a scene with the WLF where we see them preparing for war. Show watchers don't have the full context of just what exactly is happening yet, but they can probably make assumptions based off of what they've seen, and it's clear to game watchers that they're preparing for the Seraphite Island raid. It's mostly a brief scene to show us that something is clearly happening on the other side of this conflict. Abby and her crew are missing, even to the WLF, and it also tells us that Abby is a very decorated soldier among their ranks. Meanwhile, back at the bookstore, after Ellie and Jesse's banter, the radio they stole warns of a sniper somewhere in Seattle. They cross-reference a map to find out where it's happening at because they're pretty sure it's Tommy, given that 1, it's a very good sniper pinning a squad down, and they set that up in episode 1, and 2, the radio confirmed that it wasn't a Seraphite. They head that direction only for Ellie to see the Great Wheel of Seattle, and since it's right next to the aquarium, she then realizes that's what Nora meant. Also, side note, but it's something bugging me. I know they probably pushed back the date of the apocalypse to 2003 so that the show would line up with its original release date once they hit the 20-year time skip, but it's starting to age in a strange way because the show obviously wants to include a bunch of things that were made in the world post-2003. One is that Future Days by Pearl Jam didn't come out until 2013. 2 is that the Great Wheel of Seattle wasn't built until 2012. It's easy to ignore, of course, and it's a bit nitpicky, but it's just starting to make me think that the timeline of events probably should have just been kept the same. Whatever. So Ellie and Jesse argue about which way to go. Find Abby at the aquarium, or Tommy where he's sniping the WLF at. They end up splitting up after a heated argument where Ellie briefly denies that it's Tommy who is shooting purely to justify her abandoning him to get Abby. And then Jesse reveals that he was actually one of the no votes in the second episode, and calls her out for being selfish. I like this because, there were 3 yes votes. It would be very easy for the show to just say, yeah, the 3 yes votes were the 3 named characters you actually give a damn about. But no, Jesse actually voted no against it, and he gives a very convincing reason. And he calls her out for being selfish, basically. Ellie gets very pissed and basically admits that Jackson isn't her home anymore because her community was beaten to death in front of her. Again, just seeing these characters clash like this was a bit more of what I wanted from the game. But yeah, they split up, where Ellie finds a boat to use to get to the aquarium after the WLF take off, and we get to a scene that is frankly a little bizarre and feels like it should have been cut entirely. Ellie gets hit by a massive wave just like the game, and instead of her swimming her way to the aquarium and fighting the tide to show her like just raw determination, the wave basically kind of knocks her on her ass, and then she gets pushed ashore onto the Seraphite Island and kind of wakes up, and her boat, or at least a boat, happens to be right next to her, also washing up at the same place. And she's spotted. She gets hung up and strung up, and I don't know why I wrote that like that, but anyways, they grab a sickle, they're ready to gut her, but then the warning horns sound off, and then the Seraphites just leave her behind, let her go, and she just gets back to the shore on her boat and heads back towards the aquarium. Maybe the urge was to give the audience a little peek at what may be happening so they can follow it up in Season 3, when Abby gets a much more personal view of that attack, but overall this scene does absolutely nothing for Ellie. She never brings it up. She likely will never bring it up unless if they heavily rewrite scenes later from the game, and it doesn't impact her mental state or goal at all, since all she does is just climb right back into the boat and continue things as originally planned. Ellie makes it to the aquarium. Weirdly enough, I was waiting for Alice, the dog that Ellie kills in the game, to show up, but they kind of pussied out on it. Like, not that I'm like, yeah, kill that dog, woo, 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 r/pet free, but like, you know, that was just a really raw and like shocking moment that also tells Abby and Lev when they show up that they need to be alert because it's their first sign that something terrible has happened, and for them it's like an ominous omen, and then they walk through the door and they see Owen and Mel dead. Whereas in the show, no dog, no Alice, just empty hallways until Ellie happens to stumble into them. She sneaks inside and she indeed finds Owen and Mel arguing about something related to Abby that the show viewers will have to wait a while to learn about. And things go slightly different than the game. Same song, different dance. Ellie interrogates the two, tells them to, point to a map to show where Abby is, and you better point at the same spot or else I'll kneecap you both or something. But in the game, the group struggles and wrestles around for a moment until Ellie shoots Owen and stabs Mel. In the show, Owen reaches for a gun, but Ellie fires first.
Triple kill.
She quickly tries to get Ellie to C-section her baby, but Ellie is frozen in panic and watches as Mel's life slips away in real time, the baby with her. I much prefer the game's version of events because it felt much less in your face than the show. The game has Ellie kill them both. She doesn't just shoot in a panic and then Owen happens to get hit in the throat and so does Mel. No, she very intentionally goes out of her way to kill them. Because obviously it's unclear whether or not she would have ended up killing them anyways, but they did start attacking her. So she just went, fuck it, I have to defend myself or else I'm dead, and she does just that. She kills them both. The show seems to frame this almost as an accident, where like obviously she meant to shoot and maybe kill Owen, or at least disarm him, but and ended up killing him. But Mel was a total accident. Whereas in the game, yeah, they were both very intentional things that Ellie did. And then when Owen is dying, he says that Mel is pregnant in that vain hope that maybe it's not too late for Ellie to spare her. And when Ellie confirms this, she's freshly re-traumatized seeing what she's done. The audio is muffled and ringing, and she doesn't snap out of it until Tommy finds her. The show just rubs it in your face a little too much. On top of it just feeling like a badly timed accident. I feel like the game had just the right amount of violence, realization, then panic. Whereas the show leans a little too much on the panic side without the sound design that really puts you in Ellie's head at that moment. Things from here on out are pretty on par for the game. Ellie, Jesse, and Tommy meet up after finding her alone with the bodies and they head back to the theater. They make their plans to return to Jackson, and Ellie admits she'll have to make peace with the fact that Abby wasn't killed or even confronted, and just before things settle down, they hear the commotion. There isn't much to talk about here since it's very one-to-one with the game, which I'm grateful because this scene was already great there. Jesse gets shot in a very sudden death, and Tommy is held hostage, and Ellie reveals herself so he doesn't die. Abby gets pissed, aims her gun, cut to black. Not quite. It's a small thing, but I feel like it encapsulates the show perfectly. The game ends this scene with an enraged Abby looking on at Ellie, gun held, obviously going to fire unless something happens. It plays an intense, lingering note from the soundtrack that grows in volume like something's about to snap and all hell will break loose, and your favorite characters are all being just held at gunpoint and it seems near hopeless. But before it does, it cuts to black. Silence as it fades out, letting you sit on that terrible moment and wonder how it will end. The show does the same thing up until it plays a stock gunshot sound effect and cuts to black instead. It's added just a little too much on a scene in the form of storytelling that was already perfectly fine as is. We do get one final scene with Abby waking up in the WLF stadium and a sneak peek at where she and the other soldiers live, and as it shows the bold words Seattle Day 1, it clues the audience into what to expect from Season 3, and that is where Season 2 ends. I don't have much of a script, more like just a couple of bullet points and just freestyling, so if I just ramble on and on without much organization, that's why for this section. But I just want to give my sort of in conclusion about the show, and now that it's finished, what I think. And once again, I have to say the best parts of the show is at least mostly the original content. There was the battle in Jackson at the start of the season that was basically the highlight of the show, as well as episode 6 being the best of season 2. While episode 6, of course, did have a lot of reused content, a lot of it was very faithfully adapted, and the rest was original in a way that was both faithful to the characters and added much, much more to them. I straight up think probably my favorite scene of the show was the intro of episode 6 with Tony Dalton as Joel's dad and the talk they have and just how raw it is and how it ties into the rest of the show, and that tragic realization that Joel hoped that Ellie would do a little better than him, and she's not. I feel like that's a really strong point to land on. But I feel like the show prioritized character relationships developing in a more traditional way rather than focusing on the strong themes of the show that the way the game did. For example, Ellie and Dina's romance basically blossoming as the season continues and progresses, and them finding themselves as characters rather than letting them do that before Joel's death and then having them sort of twist and change around that once they get to Seattle like they did in the game. It also feels like the people with creative input on the show interpreted things from the game very differently from how they went down, making minor changes to things that seemed small, but all contributed to the bigger picture. And since they were changed, bit by bit things began to snowball. I feel like part of me just questions why adapt this? I mean, both of them are visual mediums already, and I feel like the game benefits from its medium more than the show does from its. Because the game is interactive and it's being told from the perspective of the character you play as. While you don't literally control everything you do as the character, like you can't just press X to make Ellie go back home, but you basically play act where you're in her shoes, you're moving her around, you're aiming her gun, but when it comes to narrative decisions, you're playing as her. I feel like being in that headspace and being able to share, I guess, the consciousness of that character for a while helps you understand where they're at, and the writing in the game in general just being much more subtle. And the show instead takes the basic beats of what those characters do in the game, but elaborates so much and adds way too much to the point where you just want to tell them, stop. It was already fine. Frankly, I think if they did their best to try to adapt the game and like one-to-one almost all the time, it'd be a lame adaptation, but at least it would have the security of being a good, subtle piece of media. Like, you know, those sorts of adaptations at least have that going for it, as artless as they are. There are good things that are original in this. Great things, even. But I feel like, especially compared to Season 1, they don't stand out as strong because the flaws in these characters and how much the writers have them elaborate on these points so much and just vocally say out loud what you're supposed to be thinking and feeling is just too much. And I think the reason I'm rambling on about this so much is because I really do like this game. I explained at the start, I'm pretty sure, like, at first I thought this game was fine, but then I played it again, and then more and more things I discovered helped me really get into this, and I realized, damn, there's a lot to these characters, and there's a lot of little things that I'm really enjoying finding and digging up, and just seeing why, like, oh, shit, this, like, Abby hurt her shoulder at the start because she fell down a hill, and, like, you can see her throughout the rest of the game, like, rolling and stretching her shoulder because she injured it, or just little things like that. The show doesn't have that same thing going for it. And I really hope that they take these criticisms to heart when they make Season 3. And that's just another thing that's unfortunate with the landscape of media right now, and it's that seasons of shows are starting to take significantly longer to make than they did back in the day for whatever reason. Like, if I went up to a teenage Stranger Things fan who has been growing up with the series their entire lives at this point, and I went up to them and I said, you know, there was a time when TV shows aired yearly and had dozens of episodes a season, and that was the norm, that would probably blow their mind, because right now, those people are waiting 3 years for like 6 episodes of a finale that is bound to be mid as fuck. Sorry for the Stranger Things shade there. I have a lot of opinions about the show, as you can see. But yeah. Given that they're leaving off on such a strong cliffhanger, people are going to be waiting 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer, just to get 7 episodes, and I feel like that's really going to harm the pacing of the show. And I really hope that they had some plan in mind to really speed things along. Like, I remember, I hope I'm remembering this right, but one of my favorite developers, Remedy Game Studios, they talked recently about, you know, the development pipeline and how their games took a really long time to make, like Alan Wake 2, and they put out, I guess, like a statement or a plan, basically saying, we're figuring out a way to get these games out faster. Because yeah, the same thing even goes for Naughty Dog. Like, Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 all came out within like 1 to 2 years of each other. And then the same goes for the first The Last of Us. I think it was like 2007 for Uncharted 1, 2009 for Uncharted 2, and maybe 2011 for 3, and then The Last of Us in 2013. And then 3 years for Uncharted 4, which was a little longer, but that's just 1 year. And then 4 years for The Last of Us Part 2, and we're now 5 years after The Last of Us Part 2, and we've yet to get an original game from them that isn't just a remake or a remaster. And they've only recently just revealed that they're doing that. So this is like an industry-wide thing. So basically the point where I'm trying to get is, you're gonna be leaving people on cliffhangers, and they're gonna be waiting a long-ass time. I really hope that they have a plan in order to speed along this process. Because otherwise, I think people are going to start losing interest very fast. I mean, there's people who are like, I'm not watching the show because they killed Joel, my beloved guy. This is bad writing because it made me feel something, and then they walk away and just proclaim that it's bad because they felt an emotion that wasn't, whoa, Marvel action scene or something like that. But, you know, the people that are still here and want to see how this is going to end aren't going to be here if the writing continues to be at this quality, and if it takes like 3 years to get there again. Also, I'm recording this long after, you know, the show has ended, or I guess the season has ended, and I looked into like more other people's takes and stuff, and I've noticed something that is starting to make a little sense to me, and it's the fact that the men in the show, like Tommy and Jesse in particular, they follow similar beats to the game, but, you know, Tommy wasn't the one to initially go after a reckless revenge mission, like in the game. In the show, it's Ellie, and Jesse is very much promoted to less of an equal to Ellie and more like a leader and a babysitter. And someone pointed out that, like, you know, it's a little weird that a lot of the women in the show, like Ellie and Dina, are now having their characters changed so that they, like, of course in the game Ellie is being reckless, but it feels like she's more incompetent. And everything that she does is either aided by a man or is like a freak accident. Like in the game, it was obviously of her own volition to kill Mel, whereas in the show, it's a total accident, and Mel's reveal pregnancy is more Ellie feeling bad about that freak accident and less of her being able to empathize and realize a horrible mistake she's made. Because she's also taking care of someone pregnant, and the realization that she went out of her way to kill someone who was carrying a completely innocent bystander. I guess it just feels like Mel's death in particular, like a lot of things in the show, really call into question Ellie's competence and her agency that she had both of in the game. Whereas in the show, a lot of that is called into question, and there's also Mel, who, her death in the game was, of course, as I keep saying, it was Ellie's choice. She went out of her way to kill her. I mean, yeah, you could say that it was self-defense, but at the end of the day, she didn't accidentally turn the knife on her and then stab it in her neck. She meant to do that. And her panic attack at the realization that she was pregnant allowed her to empathize and, I guess, connect Mel and Dina, whereas Mel's death in the show felt more like she was just the vessel for a baby, if that makes sense. And yeah, someone pointed that out, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that. So yeah, I really hope that things improve, that the show can evolve from this, that Abby's side of the story is done justice. I don't think we need a fourth whole ass season in order to finish up the story of part 2. I really don't. I think it can be done just fine with one more season. Please don't milk it, because I feel like if they try to, it will be to its detriment. overindulging on something that really can just be wrapped up very quickly. But yeah, that's all of this rambling. Thank you for watching this. I have no clue how long this video is about to be. I know editing is going to be a pain in the ass, but hopefully you enjoyed. I'll see about making more stuff like this, or just video essays about different games that I enjoy and just deep dives into that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll maybe see you around. I don't know, I'll see how this pans out. Yeah, bye.